Spring cleaning has started, and the Calgary Flames are holding on to every ancient artifact.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I'm your host, Jess Belmosto, joined by my partner in crime, Nick Zararis, and we have to kind of just get the facts straight and really lay out the critical thinking aspects and how you should basically a little bit of media literacy heading into the off season. And Nick, how are you doing today?
Other than the fact it's 91 degrees in April and there's a brush fire like 5 miles down the road that there's a lot going on. But other than that, we're doing fine. I'm going to a barbecue as soon as we're done with this episode. It's the Friday happy hour episode. We're thriving.
Yeah, no, it's great. We're just, ignoring quite literally everything's on fire, but it's fine. It's perfect. So thanks for hanging out with us today. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts. We are here for you every single day. Really looking forward to the off-season content that we have planned because there's a lot to go through, and you might need a little bit more than just the off-season to really get through everything that the Flames have caused us to spiral into.
Yeah, the Flames have been embroiled in a lot of the biggest storylines in the last 12 months of the NHL season. They had 2 bona fide stars go somewhere else. They replaced them with reasonable facsimiles for their production. They have a coach who's won multiple championships. They have a team that on paper is very talented, a Vezina finalist goalie, a defenseman that, if everything breaks right, could be a Norris candidate in a good season. The Flames are a very fascinating team to look at from the 10,000-foot view. Mm-hmm. When you actually look at them, though, and you start, peeling back the curtains, peeling back the layers, whatever expression you want to look, there's not really a whole lot going on. The Flames are the quintessential mid-team. They are the first team out of all the teams in the playoffs. They're going to finish with the best record of any team that doesn't make the playoffs in the Western Conference. And to be frank, in a normal year, they wouldn't have been this close to begin with. They finished with, I want to say, 92 standings points, which most years that's going to leave you 4 or 5 back of the last wild card. Mm-hmm. But because the West this year and the league in general, I know we talked about this, I want to say last month, maybe in February even. This has been one of the worst NHL seasons in terms of just quality, because you have 10 teams who legitimately, first day of the season, got off the bus, no aspirations to make the playoffs.
No. And you knew who those teams were going into it.
Yeah.
I didn't think Columbus was going to be as bad as they were.
No.
The Ducks, the Canucks, oh my God.
The Canucks were not supposed to be this bad. The Ducks intentionally. I mean, the Ducks signed a bunch of free agents purely so they could trade them at the deadline and get more assets. But John Klingberg wasn't very good, so they didn't get a lot in return for him. But yeah, the Flames in a season where it was right there in front of them. I had that stat the other day about their record against non-playoff teams. Well, they were, I want to say 18. Where is it? Non-playoff teams 16, 13, and 8 this season against non-playoff teams. And that's your San Jose's, your Chicago's. That's your season right there. Your 1 loss to San Jose and your 3 losses to Chicago. I know one of the losses to Chicago was in overtime. Chicago's one of the worst teams ever assembled. The Blackhawks were assembled. They gave away guys last summer. They gave away DeBrincat for basically nothing. They gave away Kirby Dach for basically nothing because they knew they wanted to be in the mix to get Connor Bedard this year. So until teams start being more honest with themselves and until the Flames can kind of figure all that out, and that's something we're going to talk about a little more in the second segment, is just until you're realistic with what you want to do and your actions match up with your messaging, you're going to be where the Flames are, which is that soggy middle, which is where no one wants to be.
Yeah, no, I was actually going through the YouTube comments when I got home from work probably half an hour ago, and someone commented, it was your biggest crush is picking in from 14 to 18. And I was yeah, the Flames probably do have a crush on just that god-awful mid spot of draft picks.
This is a good draft this year, so like that draft pick is worth more this year than it would be in most years. But
Yeah.
still, you either want to be a team that's in the mid to late 20s, you want to be 24 and back, or you want to be in the top 10 with a chance to slide up into that top three. Unless you're in one of those spots, if you're the last team in, like you as a Predators last year who got killed by the Avalanche in the first round, it's nice. You get 2 extra home games, you make a little extra money, but you got to be realistic. You know you're not winning the Stanley Cup.
No, there definitely are teams. I think, more so in the West. I feel like the East is just a different creature in itself. But like in the West, I feel like most of these teams are just kind of like extra revenue. Woohoo. None of them really have, besides, I guess, Edmonton, really establishing themselves.
No, it's different. It's different. So let's get going on the first topic we have here. Something we were going to talk about the other day, but we kind of got carried away talking about something like we just did for the first 5 minutes of today's episode. But just media literacy, basic sports media literacy. So when you see someone report something, your first thought needs to be who's reporting this, who's benefiting from this, and who's getting hurt by this being reported. Because when information is given to journalists, it is not given out of the kindness of that person's heart. It is being given so it gets reported to advance a specific agenda. I know I was reading earlier today, it was breakup day. The Flames had their media availability, reading the quotes, whatever. Okay, that's verbatim quotes. That's not speculation. That's not I'm hearing. That's one thing. If you are, it's breakup day, guys are available to the media. That's, there's no disputing that. There's no, this isn't benefiting anyone or hurt anyone. That's verbatim. When you see source reporting that sources close to the organization think, or in people familiar with the thinking of X, that type of stuff, it leads you to I need to think about this for a second, because a lot of the reporting we've seen right now is Brad Treliving was offered an extension during the course of the season, and he said, we'll deal with this later. I don't want to worry about this right now. And from what I've read, that was either in December or January, where he said, okay, I don't want to deal with this anymore. We'll worry about it after the season. Now that got reported again today. The other part of that is Darryl Sutter has, I think it's $8 million left on his contract over the next 2. You said that very fast.
Yeah, because it's been burned in my brain since I saw the tweet yesterday, and I can't stop thinking about how they're paying him $8 million.
Over the next 2 years, yeah. So that being reported, that's probably just your straightforward. Darryl's not walking away from that money. If you want to fire him and pay that out, you can do that, but you have to fire him to do that. He's not just going to walk away out of the kindness of his heart.
No one, and I said this on yesterday's episode, no one in their right mind is willingly walking away from that money. I don't care if you're the richest person on the earth, and like to them, like that $8 million is like $100 to us normal people, but no one is walking away from that. Money is money. It changes things. Sutter is a family-oriented human being, and he knows that they have the farm, but also, some liquid cash is also really good to pass down as well.
Yeah, definitely. So because the Flames are in that position where until they decide what they're doing with Brad, they probably can't decide what they're going to do with Darryl. So that's priority number one, and something we're going to talk about a lot in the next segment about what are the priorities for the organization going forward. Until you decide, A, we're either bringing Brad back, or B, Brad's leaving, okay, then you have to decide, okay, can we bring in someone here who's going to work with Darryl? Do we want Darryl's input on who we bring in to work over him? What's our process going to look like for replacing Brad if we don't want him to come back? And if he comes back, what are our expectations for him? Because you have a team that underperformed expectations, and you're bringing back the GM, the coach, and the bulk of the team. So how are you going to sell that to your fans who, through thick and thin here, have went through the ringer this year? You heard guys on the team say it. Backlund himself said it. This is the most draining, difficult season I've had in my career. And that's somebody who's been in the league a long time now. So it's really going to be hard to sell that to people that we're just going to run it back with the same exact group. And it's just going to be better this year because it can't possibly go as bad as it did this year. That's a hard sell.
I don't know how this could logically work. Can they shift Sutter's role, into an advisor?
Yeah, they can
Okay.
make it. They could give him a fake job. There are plenty of guys who have that. Who they don't want to fire them because they don't want to have to pay them to do nothing. So they'll give them a title in the front office, where they'll be a special advisor or the
Advisor.
advisor to
Yeah.
the team president, advisor to the GM, or just a consultant. That's a
Yeah.
blanket title you can use for pretty much anything in a front office. They could do that as well if that was an avenue they wanted to pursue, because it's clear the owner's relationship with Darryl has a lot more weight, and they wouldn't just tell him to get lost. It would be, well, we want to go in a different direction, but we're going to take care of you. That's how I'd imagine that would go.
Yeah, and I mean, I respect that. You're not going to burn. I mean, you could burn bridges. This is the NHL, for God's sake. Anything is possible. But I feel like there is too much respect for Darryl Sutter from ownership.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that the lines are blurred, and it's kind of our job to find some clarity amongst these things. And right now, with the state of Twitter and the way that it is, turn on notifications for like the insiders are actually these insiders, so you don't get duped come July 1st.
Yeah.
Do it preemptively. You gotta just do it beforehand. Otherwise it could get messy. But coming up next, we are going to talk about some of the priorities of the offseason with the Calgary Flames, because there is quite a lot to just dissect. But before we do that, I do want to tell you about eBay Motors. And a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, not the Calgary Flames roster. And the same thing goes with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for the green check and stay in the game with eBay's guaranteed fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions may apply. So thanks everyone for hanging out with us here on Locked On Flames, and make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, and we're ad-free on Amazon. And I don't know if anyone's been on Twitter living online terminally like us, but there's an ad in Times Square. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, making moves. Us, Sabrina Carpenter had an ad up there a few weeks ago. Haley Steinfeld. We're moving the needle
there, right,
a little bit.
Them.
Moving the needle a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
What? Okay. Outside of Brad Treliving, what is like your 1A?
The most important thing is they need to decide what they are. Are they a Stanley Cup contender? Are they going to say we're just going to try and make the playoffs? Are they going to say we're going to take a step back and try and redesign our roster a little bit? And whatever the result of the season is, it doesn't really matter because it's about the year after that. Mm-hmm. That's really what matters more than who they pick to be the GM, who they pick to be the coaches. What is our goal? If you don't have a clear, defined, set outlook of we expect to contend for a Stanley Cup, or we want to make the playoffs, or we want to redesign our roster, so if we take a step back, that's okay. Until you make your decision which of those three lanes you're in, you're always going to struggle when you don't have clarity about your direction. Because then people aren't exactly sure, because you have Darryl coaching every single game like it's Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final, where he's going to run a short bench, guys are going to get skipped over, he's going to be inclined to go with what's working as opposed to sticking with something that might not be working over a long period of time. So once you decide what you want to be, then you can decide, okay, if we want to retool our roster and take a step back, can Brad do that? Or do we want someone else to do that? Or do we want Brad to double down on the group he's already assembled and push more chips in the middle and go for a Stanley Cup? Or do we want to stay where we are, get a new GM, get a new coach, and kind of see if maybe there's something more we can get out of this group? Those are your three paths forward, really. Other than that, I can't see anything. I can't see another path other than those three. I don't think the only way there's a fourth path is if they decide we're blowing it up, because you've got a lot of the one-year contract guys going into after next season, where you're talking about Lindholm, Hanifin, etc. You saw what Lindholm said today. That wasn't exactly the most committed response to staying in Calgary long term, but that's the fourth path. Realistically, those are your four avenues for going forward. And until you decide which of those you are, you're going to be in this state of limbo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's so hard to picture like these conversations, and it doesn't just happen overnight. These are conversations that happen over weeks and months of
Yeah.
time. But ultimately they should have a decision made by now. This isn't something
Yes.
you continue to sleep on. Like you saw how the season went through the whole 82 games. You witnessed that god awful dumpster fire, and you owe it to your players, the people you are employing, to do something better than whatever
Yeah.
this was. And especially the guys who basically said, I don't know if I'm coming back next year or the year after next. Like, I'll deal with that contract when it gets here. Just the non-committal answers are just not they're not very reassuring to me and what this future may look like.
Definitely. I mean, we talk about this all the time. There's 32 teams in the league.
Mm-hmm.
10 of those teams eliminate themselves from the playoffs the first day of the season. So we're talking about 20 teams. Of those 20 teams, 12 are actively trying to be Stanley Cup champions. Of those 12, about 5 or 6 actually have a chance of winning the Stanley Cup. Right now, the Flames are one of the 20 teams that thinks they're competing for the Stanley Cup, but isn't actually in the tier where they're close enough to be considered even a tangential threat to winning the Stanley Cup because of the way the roster is assembled right now. Again, until you're honest with your intentions and what your goals are, you're going to get stuck in this soggy middle more often than not. Because if the coach is coaching the team for one specific result, but the GM's assembling a roster to pursue a different one of those avenues, you're going to have disconnect. You're going to have a lack of clarity, which has been the entire season. Is why aren't these guys playing well? They're better than this, and that was the entire season.
Yeah, and I think that not having like a clear-cut, defined path is just going to create so many issues of like false hope and saying like, oh, well, like we got this, we can do this, when you clearly can't because you tried to do it already. It's not working, and something has to change. I don't know what direction they'll go in, but it has to be something.
So I'll leave you with this as food for thought before we move on to the next segment. Brad's been on the job for 10 seasons. They made the playoffs 5 of those 10 seasons. That speaks to the some years we're going to get in and see what happens when we get there. But other than last year, and last year kind of came a little bit out of nowhere, not at any point in that 10-year window were they legitimate Stanley Cup contenders other than last year. So if you're banking on 1 out of every 10, maybe you get a chance of winning a Stanley Cup. That's not a great ratio. The best way to win a championship, especially in hockey, is you need as many cracks at it as you possibly can. Because it's really hard to get through 3 rounds of the playoffs just to get to the final and then win in the final. Winning 16 games over the course of 2.5 months is the hardest thing to do in the 4 major sports. The hockey playoffs are the highest variance, meaning the lower seeded team wins more often than the higher seed, the most out of any of the 4 major sports in North America. So you need as many cracks at it as you can get. You think about the Lightning. It took them 10 years after they drafted Steven Stamkos to finally win one. The Capitals, it took them 13 years, 14 years after they drafted Ovechkin to win one. The Penguins, Crosby, that's only 5 years. That's a little bit shorter than the rest. The Blues, repeated playoff appearances before they eventually broke through. The Avalanche, repeated playoff appearances before they finally broke through. So until you are consistently in the playoffs every year, and not every other year, not 2 out of every 3. If you need to be in the playoffs every single year with a sustained core of guys in their prime, that is the way to go forward. And until you do that, you're just fooling yourself, because just get in is not a playoff mentality that's going to result in a championship.
No, it's not. And, again, does this team even have a true core after?
Yeah. I would say it has a core. It has a few core pieces to build around, but it definitely needs more. This is not a core of an elite team. There are good players here, and we'll talk. Well, we're running up against the clock here before we move on to the next segment, but we'll talk about this a little at the start of the next one. There are good pieces here. They need more to supplement the guys that are here, that are going to be here for an extended period of time, but there's a decent core here.
Yeah, so we'll have to see what
Yeah.
the summer of whoever brings upon us. And before we move on, I do want to tell you about Game Time. Game Time is a fantastic app that you can use to get tickets, last minute tickets to local events. I know that I am not in really prime location for any playoff spot right now. Montreal, you couldn't do it for me. But no, I'll probably use Game Time to get some games to the Bruins or travel on down to unfortunate Long Island. And Game Time will help save me money when I use code Locked On NHL for $20 off. And this is the perfect place for flash sales, best seats at the lowest price guarantee. And you will always get the best price, because if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So head on over to gametime.co or the Game Time app today. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. And thanks everyone for hanging out with us. Make sure that you're following us on Twitter at Jess Belmosto and at Nick Zeraris. Where do we go from here?
Okay, so the first part we just talked about is until you identify your vision, what you want to do. The next part of that is figuring out who you want to direct and lead that vision. You're seeing around the league, you've already seen two coaches, a GM, and a president get dismissed over just today. You woke up this morning and you saw Hextall and Burke out in Pittsburgh. Dallas Eakins wasn't renewed. He was a lame duck coach. And like 10 minutes before we started recording, the Capitals and Laviolette agreed they were going to go in separate ways. So those are organizations that all said, we know this didn't work this year. This is not acceptable. We need to change what we're doing. And the Ducks, they're still kind of a blank slate, still kind of in that talent accumulation process where they're probably at least a year away from being considered a serious threat to the playoffs. Pittsburgh dramatically underperformed expectations, and the roster wasn't assembled well, frankly. They got great seasons out of the three stars. Crosby and Malkin both played all 82 games. Letang missed like a month and a half between the loss of his father and the knee injury he had, but he was still outstanding when he did play.
Unbelievable.
The goaltending, just a mess in Pittsburgh. Washington, I think they realized they weren't really a good enough to even make the playoffs. They sold at the deadline and figure, if we're retooling, is Peter Laviolette really the coach to lead a retooling roster next year? They said no. There's a few other situations to keep an eye on. There are some teams that in the first round of the playoffs, if it goes particularly bad for them, you could see a change in direction at the coaching position for a couple of those teams. But until the Flames decide where they want to go from here, you're in limbo. It seems like the first thing they have to figure out is if Brad is coming back or not. Mm-hmm. Until they do that, you're not going to get a decision on Darryl either way. I'm operating under the assumption Darryl's back no matter what, and that Brad is back if he wants to be. But if Brad doesn't want to come back, he wants to go somewhere else, they'll bring in someone else. I'm assuming everybody's familiar. Everyone's seen the rumblings that Kyle Dubas is going to be the eye of everyone's desire this offseason to replace as GM or president of hockey ops, depending where you are. He's in a lame duck contract as well. If the Leafs win a first-round series against the Lightning this year, I'd assume he's going to re-up and stay in Toronto, where he's got the unlimited resources. If they don't make it out of the first round, I assume both him and Sheldon Keefe will be dismissed. Those are two guys who will not be unemployed for long. They've got solid NHL track records. It's just a matter of they haven't gotten lucky. I forget. I think it was Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic tweeted that the chances of the Leafs losing six elimination games in a row is like 7 decimal places over. That's where the first digit starts. That's how unlikely it is that they've lost 7 elimination games in a row. So, yeah, bad luck to some degree, but until you decide what you want the Flames to be, you can't get involved in the other stuff where, like we said on the episode I was on the other day, you can't do your exit interviews till you know who's conducting the exit interviews.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't expect the Flames to have an answer on day 1 or day 2 of the off season, but
No, they're not that type of team.
Yeah. Like I feel like the longer things kind of sit and stew, it could very well end poorly for the Flames. It reminds me of the summer that they kept Jeff Ward as they named him their head coach, and they were like, yeah, no, we didn't interview anyone else. We just knew he was our guy. That's really not how job searching and finding the best candidate works.
That's not a good process. And that's another part of this. What is their process? Yeah. Who is meeting with the owner right now to say, this is what we're doing with Brad? Are you okay with this? Who's the intermediary between those two that's going to facilitate
Darryl Sutter.
Yeah, that's probably part of this is, well, I'm assuming that Brad will probably more than likely leave because he realizes that this is kind of a no-win situation. I mean, it's one of the more difficult ones in the league right now. Of the jobs that are going to be available or could become available, it's one of the more challenging ones because the roster's pretty locked in, at least for this upcoming season. They've got money tied up in a few guys who are on the older side, particularly Kadri and Huberdeau, who are a little bit older to have that much money tied up in them. So it's not an easy situation for someone to come walk in and say, oh, I can fix this. Anybody who's coming in and saying, I can fix this is full of it. Generally speaking.
You need an immense amount of therapy.
Yes.
And humbling, but like.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who look at the roster and say, you got to blow it up. You got to subtract 2 or 3 of the expensive guys who have 1 year left on their deals, get assets, reset the roster, and go for it for the 2024-2025 season, which, is 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. But that's a hard sell to tell an owner, somebody who's in their 70s, who's like, hey, I don't know how many of these I got left in me. I don't know. I'd like to win a Stanley Cup before I die. That kind of thing. It's a hard sell to tell your owner, well, if the team is bad, then people aren't going to come to the games. So it's really hard to sell your ownership on, hey, we need to take a step back and do what's right for the overall health of the team as opposed to the health of the franchise right now. This ties back to what we talked about in the last segment. What are your intentions? Is it just to get in the playoffs so you make that revenue? Okay. If you really want to get one more Stanley Cup before you die, there's a specific path you have to take to do that. And just trying to get in the playoffs as the 7th or the 8th best team in the conference is not the best path to achieving that goal of winning a championship.
No. You can't just coast to a Stanley Cup championship. That isn't how it works. Players wouldn't want it this bad if it was easy, because if it was easy, everyone would have a Stanley Cup. But I'm very perplexed on this whole blow it up thing, because I feel like every single summer Flames fans are just like, blow it up. Like, is that the answer, or are Flames fans just being dramatic?
So it's two parts to this, because I was talking with one of my friends about this the other day. We were DMing back and forth about it, and I said, if you blow it up, that's a 4-year commitment. That is a 4-year commitment to not being a good team. At the very least, it's 4 years before you can realistically expect to be a playoff team again. Yes, you have a few pieces you're high on. You like what you've seen from Peltier. You think Coronado can play. Dustin Wolf will probably make the NHL roster next year. Okay, those are 3 building blocks. You have Rasmus Andersson. You have Kadri. You have Huberdeau. Okay, what other than those guys do you have? Toffoli's going into a walk year. Elias Lindholm is going into a walk year. Noah Hannafin is going into a walk year. You have Mackenzie Weegar locked up. That's a good piece to have. You have Brandon Tanev, but he is consistently injured. So you need to decide what exactly you want this team to be. If you said we're blowing this up and we're going to do this the right way, and you came out and said it way ahead of time, the way the Rangers did a couple years ago, where you keep the fans in the loop. You be honest with them up front. We know we aren't going to win a championship with this group. We like these guys. They're all very talented, but we know there's a defined ceiling with this group. We need to take a step back for a few seasons, accumulate some younger guys. That way we can have a 5 or 6 year window where we think we can really win the championship each one of those years. Because that's the only way in today's NHL. You need to get as many cracks at it as you can.
Yeah, and it's not easy. And
no, it's not.
None of this decision making is easy because it's not just the short-term picture you're looking at. Because, if you blow it up and you have those 3-4 years that, you're going to stink, you're going to have to find a new coach in that process as well. Because I don't think Darryl Sutter is going to go into his mid to late 60s coaching.
No, that's the other thing. If you really want to do the rebuild, you need a new coach and a new GM. And can you convince your owner to pay Darryl $8 million to not coach?
Maybe because they're friends. But if it was anyone else, no.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see if some more spring cleaning happens this weekend. And if you are, of course, interested in following along with teams that can actually compete, maybe you want to listen to Locked On Panthers to hear about how our good friend Matthew Tkachuk is going to be terrorizing the city of Boston. It's fine. And hang out with the national show every day as well. But most of all, make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts, and our Twitter handles are on the screen. And just
have a good weekend. It's Friday.
Hopefully it's nice and sunny in Calgary, because I'm ready to go have a beer on my porch and just slam the laptop shut until Monday.
Don't check your email until Monday morning. Have a good weekend.